you can reflect. And so tonight, let's spend some time on what good work we've done and work that we look forward to in the future. So many of you joined in or led electoral work as TXUUJM, working with congregations and partners such as You the Vote, the Poor People's Campaign, the Center for Common Ground, and state action networks in Minnesota and Illinois mobilized hundreds of Unitarian Universalists to contact thousands of predominantly Black low propensity voters here in Texas. And one reason why we gather today is to offer this thanks to each other, to each and every one of you who took part in these efforts. Reverend Aaron calls these actions an act of faith. It's a faith that our individual efforts add up to much more than the sum of their parts, that our collective power matters for a multiracial democracy that works for everyone. Our efforts open up the possibilities that are inherent in community organizing. So there's another person on the other side of that line. The folks we spoke to connect their vote as a way to get the things that they need for themselves and their families, their communities to thrive. And yet we also know that voting is not enough. We're moving into a legislative session where we can expect that there will be politics grounded in white supremacy culture and Christian nationalism, and that this will other and harm vulnerable people. We see it already in the bills that has been pre-filed. And we gather because we must respond, we must take action for justice and pluralism, for truth-telling and love. I want to open up a little imaginative space by sharing with you the story of Hagar. This comes from one of the sources of our Unitarian Universalist faith, the Hebrew Bible. Now, Hagar's a member of Abraham and Sarah's household. They are one of the biggest power couples in the Hebrew Bible. Specifically, Sarah and Abraham hold her as a slave, and they force her into surrogate motherhood. She encounters a lot of abuse within this household, and she doesn't want to put up with it. And so she becomes what womanist theologian Dolores S. Williams calls the first female in the Bible to liberate herself from oppressive power structures. She runs away into the wilderness. This bold move embodies what theologian Sharon Welch, who was herself inspired by the words and deeds of Black women, articulated as an ethic of risk. Now, an ethic of risk embraces moral action when you don't have certainty about the outcome. It acknowledges that there will always be setbacks and failure in faith that the action itself will open up space for change, both in the heart and in the world. And so this ethic of risk brings Hagar, a lone pregnant woman, to the middle of the desert. She stops at a spring, and in my mind's eye, I imagine her just realizing the enormity of what she's done. So an angel comes by, the voice of God here in this spring, and is like, Hagar, what's up? What's going on? She says, I'm running away. It's too much. And this angel says, oh, Hagar, this is not the right time. No, sorry about that. But you need to go back and put up with this abuse. Now, the scripture does not give an explanation for this stance, but the angel does promise that things will get better in the future. While we don't know everything that was said in this encounter, what we do know is that Hagar names God, this angel, as the God who sees me. This gives us a clue that she's taken some strength from being seen and from her story being heard. So she does return to this household, But years later, she successfully liberates herself and her child. Right now, here in Texas, there are far too many people that are themselves caught up in oppressive power structures. There are people that are in jail, not even convicted of anything, and they're in jail for months or even years, losing their jobs, losing their health, and some losing their lives because they cannot afford bail. This carceral system chews up futures, families, and communities. People are suffering because they don't have health care, stable employment, or housing, or whose healthcare and housing depends on them staying up, staying in, putting up with abuse in exploitative employment situations. And as we know, this harm falls disproportionately on people who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. Anti-Blackness specifically permeates systems in the United States as a legacy of slavery. And similarly, while being white does not insulate people who are LGBTQ+ from harmful initiatives, Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are also LGBTQ are particularly vulnerable. And so as members of the Justice Ministry, we gather in witness to this abuse. We gather to name racism and poverty as unacceptable violence. We gather to name the inherent worth of each person as sacred, that each person is valued and should have agency over their lives and their bodies. As we are collecting together, we support each other and we bring with us, each of us, relationships with partners that deepen our witness, our understanding, and thus our actions. Our own singular perspective is too small. It's especially important to listen to impacted people who, like Hagar, know how to liberate themselves, and thus they can tell us what would be most helpful. Now, whenever I think of this story, I get really angry. It's repugnant that this angel tells Hagar to go back. But anger always turns me inwards, and it makes me ask, as I think about our situation in Texas, am I really offering viable alternatives? And so it makes me think about what action does my witness call me into? And so we are now at Faithful Action, another reason why we gather. Through the Justice Ministries, we can act on a statewide level through action hours, coalitions, and gatherings like the wonderful event that we have coming up in January. We'll build solidarity and have a greater impact than congregations might have alone. And together we can find solace with each other as we inevitably experience loss and grief. We gather to ground ourselves as well in the joy of relationship and in love for one another and for the world. I know most of you are also members of congregations. So you're gathering with us and you're gathering in your congregations too. And I wonder whether within your congregation, there might be room to expand the capacity for your congregation members to see. The capacity for prophetic witness, for truth telling, for centering the voices of those most impacted, and thus for action. And how could we, your UU Justice Ministry, support you in expanding this capacity? Because I'm not going to lie, next year, we will be asking you and your congregations to join us in an audacious love that strengthens and encourages us into our next moves as we take action always to bend Texas towards justice. I want to close with some beautiful words of blessing from Reverend Aaron. May we embody the divine, the God who sees us all, who particularly sees oppression and is with the oppressed. May we take the season ahead to rest and reflect on the powerful work we did this year. May we celebrate each other tonight with joy for this growing and beautiful community. And may we return to each other in January, rested and ready to put our faith into action.